welcome to Gather for Her. I'm Charlene San Jenko, and this is a very special conversation. This morning, we are celebrating, acknowledging, recognizing, and just deeply grateful for a special guest to help us today as we gather to acknowledge Indigenous History Month. And this is something, as Sara pointed out to me the other day, this is something we celebrate every month. This is something we celebrate every day in how we live and lead. I want to acknowledge this morning that my home, I'm blessed to gather with you on the traditional unceded ancestral territory of the Squamish First Nations here on the Sunshine Coast in BC. And each week when we gather very intentionally to have a conversation. I have a few questions that I've prepared and co-created with Sara, and it's just to try to keep our conversation on track. I never actually do know if that's where the conversation is going once it starts. But before we do, I want to quickly welcome and thank my co-hosts and introduce them to you. Three very special ladies that make what this experience is possible. Christina Benty is a retired politician. She's a jazz singer. She is the owner of Strategic Leadership Solutions, which is a consulting firm designed to assist teams in building a culture of excellence in leadership and governance. And beside her on my screen is Tina Overbury. Tina is a core communication specialist who works with individuals and organizations who feel called. She's a storyteller, a performer, a professional listener who works with narrative and story structure as a vehicle for human connection. And Sharon Marshall is my Indigenous sister from Vancouver Island. She is also our graphic recorder and an Indigenous entrepreneur. She's the founder of Diva Training and Staffing Solutions and the founder and president of Creative Collaboration, Inc. Good morning to my co-hosts. Thank you for being here. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our special guest this morning. Sara Wolfe is joining us from Toronto today. She is an Indigenous mother. She's a midwife, a researcher, an innovator, an entrepreneur. She has her MBA, and she is a director of a very amazing organization. But one thing that really caught my eye, if you know anything about the tomboy that is me, is she's also a hockey player. Formally speaking, she is the director of the Indigenous Innovation Initiative at Grand Challenges Canada, which is an innovation platform that seeks to spark a new generation of Indigenous innovation and accelerate the emerging Indigenous economic ecosystem. Wow, that's a mouthful. Good morning, Sara. How are you this morning?
It's funny, I've never heard that actually said out loud by someone else.
We're so thrilled to welcome you today.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here as well. And I see people joining, so it's going to be a great conversation.
Awesome. Awesome. Before we kick things off, I just want to set a little bit of an intention for the conversation. I'm going to lean into my co-hosts today because I know they're really excited for this conversation as well, about what is possible when what is possible, why we start to come together, and where conversations actually spark innovation. I'm curious what they are most excited about if they had a kind of an intention for today and kicking off this conversation with you. And I think they've all been kind of bubbling away on their own. Christina, I'm curious, what's your intention for today? What are you most excited about?
I am most excited about what happens in the conversation, like just what emerges. That's what makes me excited. Every time we have one of these conversations, I am shocked at what emerges and the trail that we go down and how rich and powerful and meaningful it is. So that's my intention in this conversation is follow the breadcrumbs and find out where they will lead. Pay attention and to wake up. So
awesome.
That's a lot of intention.
That sounds good to me.
My pleasure.
Sharon Marshall, what are you most excited about with this morning?
Well, I'm excited because there's another Indigenous sister with us, and I'm looking forward to hearing what Sara has to say, and just drawing some wisdom from whatever emerges in the conversation, because there's always something very rich and like Christina said, we never know, and then we're surprised, and it's very enlightening as well. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, drawing some wisdom, no pun intended. Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
totally. Tina O, what are your thoughts?
Well, you've already said it. Like when the word possible came up, I'm like, oh, look, that's where we're going. Ooh, yum. I'm listening for, I get my obsession, I think, with how sparks are made. So it's I'm listening for where co-creation connects with innovation, and really. It's really easy to get heady in that stuff, and so my intention is it's to stay with the spark.
I love that. Sara, I'm curious what you are most excited about this morning. What's on your heart? What's right there for you?
Well, I'm excited to get past the first 5 minutes where I tend to be a bit more nervous. So that I can get to the part where it's like I don't see everyone else and we're just having a conversation.
Awesome. Yeah.
For me, these kinds of forums they're so much more impactful for me personally, because I get to be challenged and stimulated in how I think about things, and it clarifies things for me. So for me, it's the reciprocity of it.
Awesome.
And so what I'm going to get out of it is like just being able to kind of advance my own thinking and seeing not so much what I am imparting, but rather what I'm kind of what I'm building off of and what I'm building towards.
Yeah, nice. So great. Why don't we kick things off, like warm things up with a, easy, I'm just curious, about you personally, where you're from, how you ended in Toronto, like your home community, your home nation. Give us a little bit of a background. I'd love to hear.
Yeah. So I am Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, from a community that I have connections to, which is called Brunswick House First Nation. So if you know your Northern Ontario geography at all, there's some towns in Northern Ontario called Sudbury and Sault Ste. Marie. And if you go north, there's Timmins and Wawa. And Chapleau is a small town on the CN Railroad line that has 3 First Nations in and around it. So I'm connected to one of those communities, but I never lived on the reserve. I've got, of course, family and cousins, and, my uncle and my cousin have both been chief of the community, and I have a first cousin who's one of the family doctors in the community. I grew up between Sudbury and Sault Ste. Marie, so in and around Northern Ontario was where I was raised. So in the same watershed, but kind of more in urban, rural, or not urban, more rural communities. I moved out when I went to university, and I never really went back after that. I still have family, my sisters are up north, my dad's up north, but I became a real urban girl when I moved to university. And so I've kind of moved around a few places. I've lived in Ottawa, was where I did my first degree, my nursing degree. From there, I went actually to James Bay, and I lived and worked on James Bay and Hudson Bay for not quite a year, doing outpost nursing. And that was for me, it was like my coming of age, like coming into my identity as an Indigenous person was really about being with community, and working with community and learning from community. From there, I went to England. I lived in England for 3 years in London.
Oh, that's so cool.
And I studied midwifery in London. But I've been in Toronto longer than I've been anywhere else in my life, actually, to be quite honest. I've been in Toronto since 2002, and I guess I'm a Torontonian by most accounts, although I still identify as a Northern girl.
So great. Yeah, I love hearing the journey, the thread of, what got you there.
Yeah. And, here I am in Toronto, stuck in the city, but I feel really blessed because I have 3 generations living in my house. And when COVID hit, my mom, who'd gone to residential school when she was 5, went to Shingwap Residential School in Sault Ste. Marie, and never really went back to her family or her community after that. She actually moved in with me. And so it's been a real blessing to have my mom in the house and my daughters in the house, and to see kind of this intergenerational transmission of knowledge in a very different way than had happened before. Of course, we're close with my mom and Sara regularly, and she's worked with me over the years, but it's been a real blessing, this kind of COVID space, to have her with me, making, eating meals together, and seeing her show my daughters to use the sewing machine or make bread, or just even like chatting about old stories from residential school, stories I'd never heard before that, we just come up in conversation now and they hadn't before. So it's been quite lovely.
We're gonna get into our theme of building impact, but just before I do, because I think just your story about what COVID has brought to you and your family, on a positive side of things, like, Tina wrote down there, the intergenerational transmission of knowledge, and how special that is for you and your daughter and your mother to have these times. Like, in some ways, I just so feel like this experience is literally knitted us closer together, even though we have also been separated. And I'd love to just land there for a moment and just pause there for a second and acknowledge that. I'm curious if anybody got any hits around that when Sara mentioned that, as much as I did, because I think that's just beautiful. And over the weekend, I'll take a breath in a sec. Over the weekend I was running, and what came up for me was 3 words. And the 3 words were, how healing happens. And when you said that just now, those 3 words just came up to me again, like up for me again. So just so very important. Anyone get any hits around Christina, Tina, Sharon, around that piece?
Yeah, I certainly did. Actually, I wrote it down right away, just as Tina was writing it, and how beautiful that is. In particular, when you said, I heard stories that I've never heard before. And when you create space to ask questions and get curious, and and when you're working alongside of one another, there's the opportunity for conversations and storytelling. And I'm doing it in my own life, and I've never done it before. I'm asking my mom questions that I've never asked her before. So I think that's so beautiful. And yeah, it impacted me as well. So thank you.
So great.
The only
Tina?
piece I would add, because it's, is the subtlety of the subtlety of depth in situations like that. Like, I don't mean situations, but I mean, like, it's like, oh, plane, sorry. But like when, Christina, you said the word working alongside, and it's like to really notice not even notice. It's almost like, what if we didn't notice? What if we actually didn't notice and just let? And that's kind of what happens when we're baking bread or we're teaching someone how to sew. It's like, we're not in the noticing, we're just in the alongsideness. And when you said how healing happens, I'm like, wow, I wonder if that connective tissue of a moment is where it happens.
Thank you for sharing that, Sarah. That was juicy. That was lovely. So as we chatted about the other day, our theme for this month, for June, which I cannot believe it's almost over, is building impact. And I'm curious, in your current role, as well as maybe even touching on how that role emerged from nurse to midwife to, yeah, like and I could do the same. Like, seriously, it's like, you gotta be, I swear to God, we're led, because, sometimes those dots were like, really? But, if you could speak to how you are deliberately, intentionally building impact as a leader in your current role, yes, but I trust that it's been coming along for quite some time. And, yeah, I'd love to dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about the questions that you posed, and, what do I want to say about, like, how am I deliberately building impact? I think that, I really have to go back to kind of my core values and my core pieces. And, I've done a lot of thinking about this over the years, but there's, I think that, reflecting in the last kind of few days, that's like these three core values that for me keep coming up over and over again, which is about relationships, responsibility, and reciprocity. But thinking about them from a real Indigenous perspective, right? Like, so relationships and relationality, like the relationality within my house, but also the relationships between, the generations is also reflective of, my ancestors and my faces yet to come, those grandbabies that are coming, right? I even had a conversation with my 11-year-old about how she's carrying my grandbabies right now, right? She's got those ovaries already filled up with, with the pieces for, from me directly, and that those I gifted to her from her grandmother. So we had those conversations already. But relationality is even in the relationships that we have here. And so even though they're strained and through a video, we acknowledge the territories and the peoples around us, and we acknowledge each other. And, I shout out to my team who all showed up. All three of them showed up on this call: Marissa, Layla, and Pierce. Pierce, I believe you might be the only fella on the call. And so shout out to you for always being, I think you always get singled out as being one of the only fellas on a program that's to advance gender equality. But
great.
We can't do that work without the men being on board as well. And so I honor him for being there for that piece of, as well. It's a heavy burden for him to have to carry. Reciprocity in what I spoke to earlier around what am I getting out of this, what are you getting out of this, right? So often it's about what's in it for me. If I go to this thing, what's in it for me? But this is about a reciprocity in all of the things that I do. It's like, what are we each taking away from this? How are we each kind of supporting how are we supporting each other? What am I taking away? But also, what can I give you in that as well? And then responsibility being, I think, what really ultimately led me from being a frontline, clinician, delivering babies in an urban setting, to going into impact investing. It was a bit of a stretch, but it's this idea of responsibility for me, not being that I'm responsible for everyone else, but my worldview understanding of responsibility is that I have a responsibility to work to my fullest potential. And if I have been given gifts of power or space or education or teachings or knowledge or wisdoms, then it's my responsibility to use those to my fullest potential for the people around me. And that goes back into the relationality piece again, around who's around me and who am I supporting. And so it's those things working together is how I've always, I think, built intentionally, to build impact for the people around me and for the communities around me. And I could go on and on, I think, about kind of those pieces, but I think that's what led me here, led me to GCC Rental and Just Canada to do this work.
I love it. I'll pause for a minute before we jump into, to the current role and the current opportunities. But I think that one piece that really resonates for me, and that I think, probably my attraction to you as a leader is that responsibility. I think I believe that every one of us, at least the people that are on this call, like there's something that is just below the surface. I don't know if, for people, if it's responsibility, reciprocity, or the relationships that kind of resonate most loudly for them. But for me, it's this personal responsibility that I've felt ever since a little girl. Like, it's I can't turn it off. and so we talk about that calling or that spark or that fire, but building impact or making a difference, or being there, we say she for her. It's like it's not something, leadership isn't something that I turn off and on. It's ever since I can remember, I've felt a personal responsibility to do whatever I can to make a difference. But just curious, for others, before we jump into the current role that Sara's in, any thoughts around relationships, responsibility, reciprocity? Did anything come up for you guys?
Yeah, I particularly want to talk about the responsibility. Because I loved what you said, Sara, about it, like living in, using your gifts and living in your fullest potential. And so the use of the word gift is implying that it's a gift that's been given to you, and then there's a responsibility to model how to maximize those gifts, and to be able to do that, and to model it, but also to see the best in others, see the gifts that they've been given, and draw that out of them. That's just so beautiful. That I picked up on that. It was the word gift and living in your fullest potential that I picked up on. The other thing that I picked up on, I love the word reciprocity, and you said it at the beginning, and I wrote it down right away because it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And that is, conversations like this advance my own thinking. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's actually why I'm here. This is what happens when you get curious and about how to advance your own thinking. So that's beautiful. Thank you.
So great. And any thoughts, Sharon?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, I wanted to reiterate the responsibility part. I love the 3 R's. I resonate with those 3 R's so well. Responsibility. The work that I do, I have always said that I've always felt this need to help Indigenous women find their voice. And it's probably because I have felt I haven't had my voice for so many years, and I've just found my voice. And so now I feel everything that has happened to me in my life has led me to this point where this is what I'm meant to do in life. And so the responsibility and the reciprocity and the relationships all go hand in hand. I can just see the arrow as they go around. But the other part is the gifts or the conversations. Now I'm losing my train of thought here. I didn't write it all down.
Yeah, no worries. Pipe in if it comes back. But I see the sparks around Sharon for her drawing. I can see this creative sparks going. So that thank you for the comments we're receiving in the chat. There's some great wisdom coming through, and we appreciate that very much. Leads us to the current role. So just again, just to kind of remind people, we're talking about Indigenous innovation. We're talking about a platform that actively seeks to spark a new generation of innovation and accelerate the emerging Indigenous economic ecosystem. I can't think of anything like that. It gets me more excited. Like to be honest with you, it's Grand Challenges Canada, the role that you're in. I talk about a dream building impact opportunity. At least it sounds like it for me. And I was wondering if you could reflect on what that entails, what's life like, what are the priorities like, what's your team like. I'm like open rein for a bit. I'd love to hear about life in this role of building impact.
Well, today is my 1-year anniversary at Grand Challenges Canada.
Yay!
So I've actually been doing some thinking on my own independently, just as I approach this 1-year anniversary, going into a very different field. And, that kind of idea of sparking a new generation of innovation and social entrepreneurship, like that came directly from having been a midwife and sparking a new generation of helping Indigenous families, right? There may be some parallels. I had the best job in the world. I was at ceremony regularly. I was, at the most sacred ceremony, right? Bringing those most sacred beings, our next generation, into the physical world from the spirit world. And it was a big decision to leave. It was a big decision. Again, it went back to that responsibility piece of like, I was struggling within midwifery, not because I didn't love the job, but because I was working with urban Indigenous families, supporting Indigenous midwifery at a national level. And the saying, I kept going to talks and saying the same 3 things is kind of what I felt like. I was just, always talking about kind of disparities in access and, disparities in outcomes, and how racism was like one of the core pieces of it. And, whether it was advocating for better housing for Indigenous moms and families, whether it was advocating for more food security, whether it was advocating for anti-violence, whether it was advocating for child protection to get out of people's faces, or whether it was, any of these things, justice, violence, like all of those different pieces were all rooted in poverty. And I would kind of joke, as like, I need to go fix poverty and then we'll be fine. And poverty and racism is like one of the 2 big ones. And there's a lot of people working within that cultural safety space. And I had a lot of skills from, like, healthcare has been a real leader in cultural safety. Poverty is a tricky one. Obviously, I'm not going to solve poverty in my tenure. That's like maybe a bit too ambitious even for me. But I knew that if I could get somewhere upstream to support, Indigenous women, Indigenous families, Indigenous communities, Indigenous peoples, to have more equality and more justice and more sovereignty in how they could take care of themselves, then that all of those other pieces would start falling into place. Maybe not for the immediate, maybe for the next generation, but they would start falling into place, and that I could have a small role in doing that. And so I knew that I needed to make a transition. I also knew I needed to allow the emerging growth at 7th generation midwives to flourish. There's some really amazing midwives there that are really strong leaders, and I really wanted to see them emerge and come into themselves with practice, and I knew that they were in good hands. So I made this transition a year ago, knowing that I could potentially have an impact in an economic sphere. It would be a new challenge for me, so I was getting something out of it for me. I was getting to be challenged. I was getting to be stimulated. I was getting to work within a different kind of framework. It feeds my ADHD brain a little bit to have to work on. But it was also like an opportunity to make a space better for people and to make more opportunities available for people. And I learned so much in midwifery, right? Like one of the Inuit words for midwife is that they're a nation builder. And so being able to kind of support nation building in this way it just seemed like a natural kind of transition. And I know how to do program development. I know how to be with people. We call midwife actually means with woman. So I know how to be with people to help them through major life transition processes. And now I get to help people birth new businesses and new social innovations and see them grow in their own families in that different respect. And so I think that's kind of, why I made this transition over to Grand Challenges, is to have that opportunity. And when I started out in the ecosystem, it was like, there is a lot of people talking about what they're doing, but no one's actually like supporting this kind of early stage growth, getting the ideas out. And so it was a good fit for me. I joke with my boss, I had the best job in the world. I really love my job now. And I'm not leaving because I feel like I have this second best chance in the world, and I have the best job in the world. So it's really saying a lot when I say I have a job.
Totally. I'm going to circle back and ask you about some kind of current priorities, like what's really what's really happening for you right now, like what 2020 with everything that's going on. I just want to reflect on a couple of pieces and see if anyone else has any reflection. The one piece that I mean, you nailed it. You're that transition from now you're bringing spiritual ideas and helping them birth into a physical world. You're doing your work in a bit of a different realm, but it's that same feeling of you're a midwifery in a different realm now, which is so amazing. One question that I have for you and the co-hosts is, I think one of the reasons I am as attracted to innovation and impact as I am is I think looking at the root of a solution, rather than perhaps trying to address or advocate for the symptoms of the problems that are out there very prevalently in the world. And I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I think both are needed. It's, you're looking at things from both ends. But I think that for me, innovation and impact, it's potentially looking at, solutions from a starting place. How do we get to the root, and how do we rebuild and recreate and reimagine? Whereas on the other end, you're looking at the symptoms as you were of, there's no housing, there's racism, there's all of these pieces, and you're advocating for trying to fix all of these very prevalent challenges that are out there in the world. And I was just wondering if you had any reflections on, on that, that statement, or if anyone has any reflections on that. I think for me, that's kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing, is I am really, it's back to how healing happens. Like, I'm really looking at the beginning rather than the fragmented energy and the symptoms at the end.
I'm curious what other people are.
Yeah.
I'm happy to hear from other folks. I could probably, take up a lot of space, but I'm here to have a conversation.
Can I jump in?
Sure. Yeah.
So Sara, part of what I do is I track conversations, and I start to notice things that just keep happening. And so when way back in the beginning, when you were talking about that intergenerational transmission, and it was a really interesting word to use, right? Intergeneration, transmission is the key word. And then and then you said this, then you went to midwifery and the sacredness of welcoming a new, building a nation through I would say the transmission, like being there to catch the transmission from the spirit world to the physical world. And we're in this conversation about innovation. I'm like, whoa. And then you said, but what midwifery means is is it with her? I can't remember what.
With women, yeah.
With women, right. And I'm like, oh my gosh, is innovation, is healing transmission? Is that where we are? Are we in this conversation about the transmission between, and that's how healing happens, and is that building impact? So I'm just noticing the connections. I don't have any answers. That's what's happening for me right now, is that be with state around transmission, innovation, and healing.
Well, certainly within midwifery, like the work that we did as Indigenous midwives was, we called it like health system innovation, by bringing in a group of Indigenous midwives into an urban context and working within Canada's largest hospital, Sunnybrook, and working alongside maternal fetal medicine specialists and child protection agencies and public health and all these different agencies. Was like, we had to get to like some root pieces and be able to integrate all of those Western kind of ideals around what midwifery is, and maternal child obstetric care, perinatal care are, but then also go back to our root teachings, and how do we contemporize, teachings around, fathers are not allowed to hunt during the childbearing year. And it's like, how do you contemporize that in Toronto, and being able to kind of bring those pieces in to say, well, like, maybe this is like, what is the root of that intention of that teaching? And we can contemporize that by saying, well, it was around supporting life and not taking life. And so we could talk to people around, supporting, anti-violence. It was around building communities, right? So it was not just that this family starved, they were bringing life. So the community gathered around them to support them. And so we can talk about kind of community involvement in that. And those teachings integrated the practice, it integrated the Toronto Birth Center that we built, it integrated the baby bundle project that we developed for that, based on those kind of original teachings and integrating them into what we were already doing. And so that was health system innovation in my sense. Marissa is on the call, and she'd be like, talk about the elder. So we had this elder in Winnipeg that we met with, May Louise, who when we had this circle talking about, innovation and gender equality and, social innovation and entrepreneurship and how to kind of spark this thing. And we had this reference group that we've been working with to help us shape what the program looks like. I don't know what everyone wants and needs. Tell me what you need, and that's what we'll build, as opposed to me imposing what I think you need. But the elder was like, unless we start with healing, we can't get any of the other work done. And so we have to bring those ceremonies back. We have to bring those discussions back, those hard conversations where we talk about maybe, when something went wrong, or, when it's not working, and how we can pivot and adapt without hurting people's feelings, but actually learning from it, but, sitting in that discomfort and then moving forward together collectively in that. And unless we start with healing, we can't do any of this other work.
I would like to add that, and I think healing has to start with ourselves first before we can even get into that circle and have that discussion, that we have to really sit with ourselves and figure out what needs to be healed, and then go from there.
Thank you for sharing that. It's I just am listening as I'm kind of in my own little world going, wow, I just went for a run this weekend and those words came out, and now I know why before this conversation. So I'd love to talk specifically about some of the priorities in your role now with Grand Challenges. You've got the contest here, but and it might expand beyond that. I don't know what I don't know. I'd love to just give you the floor, and what most needs to be heard about building impact right now through the vehicle that you currently have as a leader.
Yeah, well, so for those who don't know, the Indigenous Innovation Initiative, we just launched our first call. It's actually closed now. Round 1 is closed, but we're a 6-year initiative for the gender equality piece. And it's around advancing Indigenous gender equality through innovation and social entrepreneurship. And so supporting that kind of next generation with a $10 million match fund contribution from the federal government, but we're also looking to fundraise that other 10 million. So ultimately a $20 million program. So we launched our first call. That's my priority right now, is to get through round 1. If we could bring it down to the bare bones, let's just get through round 1. I have these other big ideas around what we're going to do and how we're going to do it and where it's going to go. And, you know, it's like, how do we operationalize this really awesome team that works in a decolonized, indigenized model? And, you know, how are we going to fundraise all of this extra $10 million? Like, you know, it's like oh, sure, we can do it. And then it's like $10 million. And then you hear about people like, you know, who have billions of dollars, and you're like, just give me a drop.
Yeah, just one check. Yeah.
And you know, like, decolonizing is not just simply about kind of how I run my program within a non-Indigenous organization. There's like layers and layers and layers of things that we're working on that need to get done and undone and redone and done again, right? So starting with the healing is just having conversations with within our team and also within the Grand Challenges team, being able to support those conversations that are not always easy, and being able to kind of identify, you know, what are the steps that we can take to start moving in that direction. And like that systemic change, and like just kind of being true to my values and kind of advocating for things and looking at like what are the big picture things that we can work through at a systemic level. But the delivery of the program was always really around, what does the community want? And we have this opportunity. I have these skills on how to operationalize and actually see something through. But I've always worked from like, what does the community need first? Let's go talk to the community first. Like, so I have a reference group, I have an Indigenous council, I have, you know, we finally have someone on the board who's Indigenous. You know, our team is Indigenous. Those pieces are all really important for me, but it's like, how do we keep that kind of those like systemic policy level pieces, right? So, you know, it's like great. Grand Challenges Canada is incubating the Indigenous Innovation Initiative to provide this innovation platform that has worked in low and middle income resource countries for 10 years. And they've had a huge impact in doing this work internationally, mostly in health, but also water and sanitation and humanitarian. And then I get the policies that I'm supposed to be working within, whether they're finance policies or, you know, data access policies, global access, their intellectual property kind of mandates. There's like all these pieces around, you know, ethics and environmental stewardship and gender equality. And a lot of them don't match up to the Indigenous worldview, and I know they don't match up, right? Like, how do we speak about, you know, matrilineal communities and traditional Indigenous governance structures within this kind of framework? How do we talk about intellectual property and Indigenous knowledge and have a conversation around those pieces? How do we talk about research and, you know, reporting requirements, and like they call it, you know, performance measurement frameworks, and they call it, you know, monitoring and evaluation, but it's just like measuring outputs. Like, what is it telling us? And it's harmful for my community. It gets used against my people constantly. And you're making them spend all this time writing reports that have no meaning for them. They have no meaning for me as the intermediary. And ultimately the government, do you really care how many resources were developed so you can tell the Treasury Board? Is that really what you need? Let's talk about the impact piece, but we should be talking about it from the community's perspective, not from the Treasury Board's perspective.
Right.
And so it's trying to advocate for those lobby for those kind of pieces at, you know, every which level, while then also empowering the community to be given that voice and empowering the team to be able to have the tools to be able to support the community to have that voice. And so those are the background pieces that we're working on, but ultimately right now, it gets around on.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. I do want to open it up to a bigger conversation for about 10 minutes, but before I do, because it's pretty juicy. I'm curious, Christina, do you have any reflections on the magnitude? And it felt like an accordion just for a minute when Sara was talking. Did it for you guys? Like, it was like, I'm doing this, and then yeah, right? And yeah, any thoughts, Christina?
Yeah, that's actually a good description, the accordion, because I was doing the same thing. Because when we're talking about systemic change, we need to actually have that seventh generation view, right? In the work, because there has to be sort of that organizational patience that comes. And it's interesting because, of course, my mind in particular around my work with systems, went to full gamut on the accordion. But I've got one question for you, Sara. Since this is you're coming up to your first year anniversary, if you could tell us one thing that you are really proud of that's been accomplished this year, in your work here, as you reflect back on that 1 year anniversary. And it's not a question that normally I would ask, only because I like to go broad with the systems, but I actually just want to come down and like, what is the one thing that you can go, oh, this really grounds me, that you're super proud of?
One thing?
Yeah, well, that exactly, that's the challenge, right?
I mean, my mind immediately went to my team who are sitting here, and just how much I've learned from them this year. And like, I'm working within a very different organization, and like to go from being the boss, like, let's be frank, I was the owner and founding partner of 7th Generation Midwives, and I was basically its leader for 15 years. And so to go from being the boss to being like in a bigger organization in the middle somewhere, I mean, I'm proud that I was able to create this team and kind of support this team to do this work, but also to work within a space that, like, I don't feel like I'm not the boss. And I'm like, I've always kind of had this sense of like, I'm the boss of me, and it's my job, it's my responsibility to give the team the tools that they need. And so kind of watching this team kind of grow and learn from each other, and seeing kind of them emerge in themselves in this initiative. Like, we were all new, all of us are brand new. And you do this kind of weird thing that's really kind of undefined. And so bringing in the governance and the tools around the community, and being able to show them how to kind of work with the community on that, but seeing them like take that on and kind of grow in that. I think that's probably what I'm most proud of is those guys.
It's a little bit of a dance between that large, keeping an eye on those major systemic shifts while walking in the sacredness of day to day. And I love your word, using the word sacred. That's another word that I picked up on, the sacred ceremony, right? And the sacredness and wonder that exists in those day-to-day activities, and then taking a look at it. It's a both and, right? So, which has made it such a beautiful conversation, and empowers the work that you do.
I'd love to formally close this part of the circle, and I'm going to I will shut off our recording here. In gratitude to the conversation with all of you and with Sara, I chuckle to myself, because I do believe that true innovation is this weird thing that's just kind of undefined, and that is the world that we walk in. If it is truly innovation, it's having that faith to just keep walking forward in what we don't know, and believing that we're finding the answers as we go. Thank you so much for this conversation to each of you.